public opinion against the coalition, as attacks against enemies of President Assad are seen as helping him. That's led to questions in Washington about its approach, says American University professor Guy Ziv.
And that's arguably the toughest, most complicated piece of this puzzle, what to do about Bashar Assad. And there are disagreements within the administration as to whether or not the current bombing campaign is helping or harming Assad, and whether or not Assad will ultimately be strengthened or weakened by our intervention in the Middle East at this time.
U.S. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki says there are frequent meetings and discussion about U.S. strategy in Syria, but no formal review.
Are there hard questions being asked? Yes. Is there a discussion internally about how we should continue to adjust and consider a range of options? Of course. Syria is one of the most challenging crises we face, and it should come as no surprise that we're engaged in an ongoing discussion and debate about a range of options.
In some of its military options against the Islamic State, the Obama administration may find unintended consequences, says Cato Institute analyst Justin Logan.
A lot of the things that we do to try to fight terrorism in the Middle East don't have a good effect on terrorism, and may even have a bad effect by making people hate us in that part of the world, and thereby more amenable to the claims terrorist groups make.
How best to conduct this fight and which groups to support in what ways are questions facing both Washington and Assad ally Iran, says Georgetown University professor Nora Ben-Sahel.
If it were clear who to work with on the ground against ISIS and how that was aligned against Bashar al-Assad, everybody would have an easier time calculating its interests.
On a visit to Iraq that included talks with Kurdish leaders, the top U.S. General Martin Dempsey said momentum in the fight against the Islamic State is starting to turn, but he predicted a drawn-out campaign lasting years.
Now to some politics now in Africa. Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Zida has now been appointed, Transitional Prime Minister of Burkina Faso. Colonel Zida had been among officers who took power when then-President Blaise Compaoré was forced to resign on the 31st of October during mass protests. He declared himself head of state, but on Tuesday oversaw the swearing-in of former Foreign Minister Michel Kafando as interim president. The moves followed agreement on a year-long transition to elections. The transitional charter imposes tight controls on the powers of Mr. Kafando, who was the army's choice as interim leader. The document calls for an interim legislative chamber to be installed until elections hold next year. Colonel Zida is now expected to hold talks on forming a transitional government. Back here at home in Nigeria, a study on international terrorism has ranked Nigeria 4th on the Global Terrorism Index, that's GTI, for 2013. In this next report, which was released on Tuesday, November the 18th, Nigeria is ranked below Iraq, Afghanistan and Pakistan, while Syria is ranked the 5th. The research by the London-based Institute for Economics and Peace said the number of people killed in terror attacks worldwide jumped more than 60% in 2013.
According to the Global Terrorism Index 2014 report, there were nearly 10,000 terrorist attacks in 2013. That's a 44% increase from the previous year. This raises questions about the effectiveness of the Western counter-terrorism strategy since 9/11 that has seen U.S.-led invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, drone strikes in Pakistan and Yemen, and the use of proxy forces around the world. The report by the Institute for Economics and Peace said 4 groups were responsible for most of the deaths: Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, Boko Haram in Nigeria, the Taliban in Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda in various parts of the world. This then makes one wonder, how did Nigeria's Boko Haram sect get so big? In the last 2 weeks alone, the group is believed to have struck in Adamawa, Bauchi, Kano, Kogi, and Yobe states, killing at least 60 people.
The warning signals have been there so many years in Nigeria, which successive administrators refuse to heed. They refuse to actually take seriously the warning signals. Now, in a situation whereby an individual, for instance, will steal the money that is meant for a whole community or the whole society, and pocket it and use it to do whatever, and even send his children abroad and all that, buy big cars, and to the detriment of the whole polloi in the same area.
So what has been done to tackle this menace?
It is imperative that Nigeria re-engineers her defense and security posture to cope with the threats. The DA system has a duty to help bridge the intelligent gaps in knowledge and terrorist groups. The only source of support, training, weapons, funding, and the flow of foreign fighters.
This report is an urgent call to action, not only for Nigeria, but for the entire world.
We will not be cowed by these sick terrorists. They will be defeated, and they must face the justice that they deserve. The threat is faced by countries right across the world. We must face it together.
As things stand, 13 countries are identified as being at risk of increased terrorist activity. They are Angola, Bangladesh, Burundi, Central African Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Iran, Israel, Mali, Mexico, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Uganda. Temitope Fagbemi reporting for Channels Television News.
In other news, Ivory Coast Interior Minister Ahmed Bakayoko has promised the government will meet demands for back pay of thousands of protesting soldiers. He made the promise in a television statement last night after soldiers blocked roads in the country's main cities in protests. In addition to that, Mr. Bakayoko also said soldiers would not face sanctions for protesting. The payments are due to about 9,000 former rebel fighters who were later integrated into the army. This morning, soldiers had returned to their bases in the cities of Abidjan and Korhogo, reopening several key routes to traffic. It was by far the biggest protest involving the Ivorian military since President Ouattara took office. Now, many countries, organizations, and individuals have risen to the challenge of fighting the spread of the Ebola virus disease. Some of such organizations and individuals include the likes of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which has pledged $5.7 million towards a program to increase production of experimental Ebola treatments in Guinea and other affected countries. The program will focus on treatments derived from the blood of survivors. In addition to that, the foundation also said the grant would be used to evaluate new experimental drugs. There is currently no licensed treatment or vaccine for the Ebola virus. Hospital treatment is based on giving patients fluids to stop dehydration and antibiotics to fight infections. However, there are several experimental vaccines and drugs treatments for Ebola under development, but these have not yet been fully tested for safety or effectiveness. Still talking health and, of course, Ebola, India is not leaving anything to chance. Over there, health officials have announced that an Ebola survivor has been placed under quarantine after his semen tested positive for the virus. The 26-year-old, an Indian national, traveled to New Delhi from Liberia on November the 10th. He was released from the Liberian hospital on September the 30th with documents declaring him free of clinical signs linked to Ebola. But as a precautionary measure, Indian authorities carried out tests on his body fluids, which confirmed traces of the virus in his semen. India has screened thousands of passengers arriving from the Ebola-hit countries since the outbreak of the disease. We'll take another break now on The World Today. When we come back, we'll be looking at lighter stories. Please stay with us.